Good morning and welcome back to the very important high-level meeting on forging ambitious global partnership for sustainable and resilient graduation of least developed countries. This is the first session of the second day. The meeting will begin. So I will be moderating this meeting, as you can see. So this LDC graduation, what we have been hearing even yesterday, there will be a lot of uncertainty for the graduating countries, especially the removal of the international support measure. I come from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is one of the countries up for graduation. And there's a lot of uncertainty, especially from the business community. Bangladesh, as you know, is the most users of the international support measures. And as a result, the impact is likely to be larger for the country. So, global partnership for us is very vital in this transition process. And it will be equally important for other countries as well. I mean, I can see for myself why it is so important that these support measures should continue, especially this LDC, the graduation is not just the graduation per se, in the sense that you satisfy or meet some criteria. All of us know what are those criteria. And we have been saying this yesterday also, that it's just a milestone. In order for graduation to be sustainable, graduation must also should mean structural transformation. Without this structural transformation, countries will remain vulnerable. And as you see in some of the African countries, like Botswana, even Equatorial Guinea, they have graduated, but they have remained still very much resource dependent. And that means their vulnerability has not gone. In the case of Bangladesh, we are overly dependent on one sector, which is garments. And then it means without the structural transformation and having other sectors, we will not be out of doors. So that's why this morning session is looking at accelerating structural transformation through enhanced productive capacity, value addition, diversification, innovation, and digitalization. So without further ado, I will invite the keynote speaker here, Mr. Jeffrey Despacio, Senior Advisor, Economic Transformation Africa, CDP member. Yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank OHRLS and the government of Qatar for inviting me to be part of this very timely meeting. So within the time given to me, I will present a discussion on structural transformation. And I would like to start by saying what it is not and what it is, because there's some confusion about structural transformation, although it's very important, and we include it in various documents, including in the Doha Program of Action. So I have really 4 points. One is to say something about structural transformation very quickly, and then identify a couple of drivers of structural transformation. There are many, macroeconomic policy and so on, but I will focus on product capacity and industrial policy. And then we'll end by highlighting that I think there's a need to rethink about industrial policy, and we need smarter, multidimensional industrial policy, and then a few recommendations for you to consider. Now, very quickly on what structural transformation is not, I would like to say the following. First of all, as you know, when economies embark on economic development, their structure changes. For example, the importance of primary sector diminishes and secondary sector become very important. The share of population moving from rural to urban area increases and the process of urbanization starts, and growing share of the labor force also gets engaged from primary to secondary activities. So there is a change in the relative importance of different sectors to GDP. But does this mean that the country is undergoing structural transformation, resulting in a qualitative shift in its production structure and capabilities? No, not necessarily, especially if economies remain locked in low productivity and low value production system. Now, then what is structural transformation? Basically, what we call structural transformation is a shift in factor of production, mainly labor and capital, but also technology and natural resources, when they are reallocated with carefully designed policies from traditional to modern sectors, from low value to higher value economies or production activities, from low productivity to higher productivity sectors, and from low technology to high. This qualitative shift is what we call structural transformation. Therefore, the conclusion or the message I'm saying is that structural transformation entails a qualitative change in the economy. That's when we say structural transformation, not just because the importance of primary sector and other sectors are different. That's very important. And secondly, equally important, it occurs within sectors and across sectors. For example, for Bangladesh, structural transformation would mean building on ready-made garments to produce higher value clothes that they sell in boutiques and with a high value. That is structural transformation, instead of just simply remaining to produce low value, cheap labor type of t-shirts and so on. Or moving into other sectors like electronic and high tech across sector. That's also structural transformation. Now, the message is the following. Most LDCs, including those approaching graduation, they lag behind in the structural transformation. That's one message. As a result, they risk remaining trapped in low value production system even after they graduate, unless, of course, they accelerate the process of structural transformation. Now, the question is, how do they do that? And what are the key drivers of structural transformation? Let me say a few words about that. I will identify two of them, as I said. One of them is product capacities. You don't have much time, so I'll just focus on that. What are productive capacities? This is very important. A lot of work has been done on this. This has a broad set of competencies, technological capabilities, entrepreneurial skills, private sector production capacities, institutional infrastructure development, dynamic market systems that together enable countries to produce a wide range of goods and services that they can either consume domestically or export competitively. Basically, really, for me, in a simple way explaining product capacity is that's what distinguishes developed from developing country. If you ask me, why is it that some countries, say, for example, South Korea, countries that has developed its product capacity in the last 15 years, why is it South Korea can produce up to 8,000 different product items and export to 163 countries? Products that range in sophistication from simple plastic toys to the most sophisticated machinery, electronic products, while other countries, say one of the African LDCs, rely on 5, 6, maybe 7 primary products for 60, 70% of their export. Why is it? Why can't they export like Korea? That is explained by the level of productive capacity. I think that is short, in a very simple way, explaining it. Therefore, the more developed a country's product capacity, the greater its economic complexity and its ability to produce a diverse range of sophisticated products that will make structural transformation faster and deeper. That also explains, for example, if you ask me why some LDCs have problems, like, for example, why they remain locked in low productivity, low technology, low skill intensive, it's because their product capacity is not developed. Why it also explains why they depend on imports of manufactured goods and exports of commodities, why they suffer from structural weaknesses. Therefore, I think in short, these are the key points that I would like to make about product capacity, the fact that it's really critical. So, to summarize the quick message and about product capacity structural transformation, first of all, achieving, as the chair was saying, sustainable, inclusive structural transformation will be virtually impossible without expanding product capacity. That's the message I want to leave with you. Secondly, LDCs that graduate without strengthening their product capacity are likely to face difficult post-graduation development trajectory. You've heard of middle income trap. That's why. Countries, when they move from LDC into middle income, without developing product capacity, they will remain locked in low-value production system, and hence the middle income trap. Therefore, graduating countries should use the graduation process, this is another message, including smooth transition strategy, as a mobilizing force to accelerate the development of product capacity. Now, this poses questions. These questions are the following. You may ask me, okay, how do countries measure the level of development of their product capacity? How do they identify the binding constraints of product capacity? More importantly, what policy measures can help them to boost product capacity? These are very pertinent questions. Now, luckily, for the last 20 years, UNCTAD has been working on these issues, and they have developed certain practical tools that graduating country can use with the help of OHRLS, which has a mandate to coordinate support to graduating countries, and the guidance of OHRLS, including using IGRAD. These tools can be used. Let me identify 2 of them. Now, one of them is this product capacity index that UNCTAD has developed. This is a multidimensional index. It measures where they are in terms of development of product capacity countries. They call it PCI. It's also identifies in terms of benchmarking countries, if you want to compare with other countries, if you want to catch up. And there are 8 elements that consist of product capacity, and this is very important. This is how they measure product capacity. These 8 core elements are human capital, natural capital, institutions, ICTs, development of information communication technology, energy, private sector development, structural change, transport infrastructure. The numbers in blue are the indicators used to develop the composite index. Now, the LDCs that have graduated or at a different stage of graduation are those that have made a steady progress across most of these dimensions of productive capacity. Let me give you quickly how this is presented. Look at this now. As shown in this graph, developed countries continue to record the highest product capacity index score with an average of about 60.9 score in 2004. Have a look at developing countries excluding LDCs. They are below developed countries, but they have also made a steady progress over the years. Now, have a look at by contrast, LDCs. The LDCs remain below other developing countries with the average PCI score of 29.3%. So this helps helps countries to monitor where they are in terms of development product capacity. And very quickly, if we look at the graduating countries, it's very revealing. If you can see that PC development in graduated and graduating countries, this one, most graduating countries have made a steady progress in product capacity development, also, although some more than others. For example, Bhutan and Sao Paulo, Principe, graduated the last 2-3 years, are converging with the average score for other developed countries. So this kind of measurement will help countries to see where they are in terms of development of their productive capacity. Now, very quickly, since I don't have much time, the second driver I'm talking about is industrial policy. I mean, here, let me summarize it in quick 4 points. First of all, it's really an essential tool for building product capacity and driving structural transformation. I know that industrial policy has been put aside the last for about 20 or so years, but it's come back now, thanks to US and European countries. So I think LDC should start using industrial policy. However, not the old-fashioned approach to industrial policy, where the emphasis was picking winners and manufacturing was no longer is viable. I think the reality we live in now with global value chains, with highly integrated international production system, a different type of industrial policy is required. One that meets the complex reality of 21st century that LDCs should rethink, redesign. So there's a need for a new generation industrial policy for graduating countries, for LDCs, that's multidimensional and that addresses across different sectors, not only manufacturing. That is, I think, the key point. So in short, such a policy must extend far beyond manufacturing and should encompass a broad and coordinated set of policy areas, including, for example, skill development, services. Services is very important. 30 to 40% of manufacturing consists of services. So that should not be ignored just because industrial policy is about industry. Regional value chains, for example, technological learning, innovation, digitalization becomes important. It should be part of the industrial policy, which I'm sure Deodat will talk about. Infrastructure, energy systems, and whether we like it or not, new industrial policy should be also green industrialization, because we can't ignore the climate issue, product diversification, and also not forget the new frontier technology, including AI. Now, this, in essence, is a policy for promoting structural transformation. So I conclude by highlighting 3 recommendations that for your consideration. First of all, I think it's important the graduating countries should conduct national productive capacity gap assessment. This is very important because they use it as to identify binding constraints that hinder development of productive capacities. Yeah. And also, it helps them to map out weaknesses across the 8 components of product capacity that I've identified. So the gap assessment is really important in my view, and OHRLS could help coordinate this. I think the second recommendation is that in developing a smooth transition strategy, I think it should be grounded in the findings of this gap assessment. Why? Because it will identify precisely where policy should be targeted. Because not all countries, even those who have developed product capacity, would have developed all dimensions of product capacity. So I think it's really important to identify where you should focus. It will help them identify priority areas. And the last recommendation is about industrial policy. I think it's important to design industrial policy in a very multi-dimensional way so that it's aimed at building capabilities across sectors, not only manufacturing, across sectors, agriculture, mining, and other sectors, services. It should focus on expanding product capacity. It should focus on building skills and technological capability because that's how they will compete. It should promote green industrialization, it goes without saying, and focus on innovation, including at enterprise level, because when we talk about innovation, LDCs have a tendency to focus on R&D centers, but I think enterprise level innovation is critical. That's the difference between Russia, which is highly sophisticated science technology capability to produce the most sophisticated fighter jets, but you don't see a lot of Russian TVs and mobiles being sold because as a countries in Asia, they focus on innovation at enterprise level, which is really critical. And then, of course, transforming economic structure, making enterprise countries move up the value, productivity, and technology ladder. Sorry I had to rush this, but thank you very much. I will stop here.
Thank you very much. And a few things that I would like to highlight from the keynote presentation. One is the definition of structural transformation or structural change. The traditional definition or meaning that we have in our head is moving from agriculture to industry and then to service sector. That's the standard definition of structural transformation or structural change. But it has to be more than that. As our keynote speaker presented, there's a qualitative change, and a structural transformation can happen within the sector. Like, he gave an example of garments industry in Bangladesh, from low value garments to high value garments. So that could be one way of a structural transformation. Yesterday, we heard from Maldives that from simple traditional tourism, they moved to more high value, high-end tourism, ecotourism, etc. So within the sector, transformation, then across the sector transformation, so moving from having complex products, more products, that the productive capacity is important for that one. How, he gave examples of South Korea, which produces thousands of products and exports to so many countries vis-a-vis other countries. So how complex and variety of products one can produce, that's also an important one. So it's not just within, but across. And then productive capacity is not just the skills and technology, but also how we organize our business. So even the managerial part is also important, how we organize our business, how we develop partnership with other countries. That's also part of the productive capacity. Then there is industry policy, has been mentioned. Then old-fashioned industry policy. Old-fashioned industry policy would be based on subsidies and trade protection. So that's why we had to pick the winners, which sectors will get the protection, which sector will get the subsidies. And in the new era where we have the globalized economy, and we have to, we cannot use taxes and subsidies, and also there is the risk of choosing the wrong sectors. So what we have here is more generic policy that will affect, that will be equally non-discriminatory, I would say. Graduation itself is part of the industry policy because now we had some access to the market, duty-free, quota-free access to the market. So that is like the old-fashioned industry policy that you get the subsidy, you get the preferential treatment, and whoever can take that preferential treatment can take. But now we have to think of what we call creative destruction. So as we move from that kind of thing, easy, preferential access-based industrialization to more competitive-based industrialization. We have to now compete with other countries. And so the graduation itself should be looked at as kind of a industry policy that will force the inefficient sectors, that those sectors which survived only because of easy access to the markets and subsidies and trade protections, now will have to give way to more efficient sectors. In this case, what the keynote speaker suggested, and we in Bangladesh, we're also thinking to invite UNCTAD to do gap analysis of our productive capacity. It's very important that we know and link the STS to the kind of policy that is needed to improve our productive capacity. So that's how graduation and structural transformation will gel together. I think that's a very important suggestion that you have given, and especially when you look at the productive capacity index. Index is the amalgamation of so many other things. You have to decipher from each of these index. Index is only gives you a signal, kind of a signaling, but then you have to understand the details, and that details got to be done in a more professional manner. I think it's very important suggestions, and UNCTAD plays a very vital role in this regard. So again, I'm not going to say too much on this. Now I invite our the panelists, His Excellency Mr. Francisco Jose da Cruz, the permanent representative of Angola to the United Nations. I have two questions for you, Your Excellency. In what ways can LDCs strengthen the skills, development, entrepreneurship, and quality infrastructure, that is energy, transport, logistics, to support higher value-added manufacturing, services, and agro-businesses? And how can partnership with private sector, academia, regional organizations, and international partners bolster these efforts and manage systemic shocks? The second question is a related one. How can regional integration initiatives and international cooperation, including trade preferences, technology transfer, capacity building, impact investing, and de-risking tools be better aligned with national efforts to build productive capacity, diversify exports, support SMEs, and ensure resilient, inclusive structural transformation beyond graduation? It's a long question. I've been given this question.
No, thank you, Chair, for giving us the opportunity to be part of this panel. Excellencies, for the least developed countries, LDCs, structural transformation will not happen unless three pillars advance decisively and simultaneously: skills development, entrepreneurship, and quality infrastructure. Without this foundation, no economy can move into higher value manufacturing, services, or agribusiness. That is exactly the message conveyed by the Seville Commitment, the Doha Program of Action, Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, the 23rd Agenda for Sustainable Development, and also our own national framework in Angola, including the National Development Plan 2023-2027 and the Angolan 2050 vision. Let me address the first pillar, skills development, the most fundamental driver of productivity. Higher value sectors demand a workforce that is technically trained, digital capable, and adaptable. This is why Angola is investing strongly in technical and vocational educational and training, expanding science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the STEM education, and promoting digital skills linked to real opportunities in the agro-industry, energy, logistics, manufacturing, and services. As the 2030 Agenda makes clear, quality education and skills are critical enablers of economic transformation. Without skills, there is no productivity, no competitiveness, and no innovation. The second pillar, entrepreneurship and SMEs, the engine of diversification. SMEs are central to SDG 8 and to the transformative ambition of the Sevilla commitment. They generate jobs, innovation, and new economic activity. Yet, they face persistent barriers, limited financing, few innovation space, and weak business development services. Angola is expanding incubators, technology hubs, and targeted SME support. Concrete examples include the Orange Digital Center Angola, launched in 2023 to provide digital skills and startup incubation, Kianda Hub, one of the country's leading innovation hub, and the Acelera Angola program, which supports early-stage entrepreneurs. On financing, Angola is strengthening SME support through the Banco de Desenvolvimento de Angola, credit lines, and through the production support, export diversification, and import substitution program, launched in 2018 to increase national production, boost non-oil export, reduce imports through various initiatives, including providing credit and support to the national economy. Support SMEs, as stressed in the Doha Program of Action, is indispensable to build productive capacity and diversify exports. The third pillar, quality infrastructure, the backbone of competitiveness. Inadequate energy supply, weak logistics, and insufficient digital connectivity are among the biggest obstacles to the growth of LDCs. In Angola, we are addressing these gaps through electricity expansion, modern logistical platforms, improved digital infrastructure, and strategic projects like the Lubito Corridor, a rail and infrastructure project that connects the port city of Lubito on the Atlantic coast to the mining regions of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and Zambia. These investments reduce costs, attract investments, and open space for value-add industries. This is precisely the type of long-term strategy recommended by the Sevilla Committee. Finally, a decisive element, strategic partnerships. LDCs cannot undertake this journey alone. Strategic partnerships are critical. The private sector brings investment and technology. Academia ensures skills, research, and innovation. Regional institutions like the African Continental Free Trade Area, aimed at creating a single market for goods and services across the continent. The African Union, the African Development Bank, provide scale, market integration, and normative harmonization. And the international partners contributed with technology transfer, capacity building, and risk mitigation instruments. The Sevilla Commitment makes this point unmistakable. Structural transformation depends on coherent, results-oriented partnerships. Excellencies, strengthening skills, empowering SMEs, and developing modern infrastructures are not isolated interventions. They form a single, integrated strategy. When we pursue these pillars together, supported by stronger partnerships, we build LDC's economies that are more productive, more diversified, and more resilient to future shocks. This is the path Angola is pursuing. It is the vision we believe can serve to our countries. Let me address the second question. Sustainable structural transformation for LDCs requires the national effort be strongly reinforced by regional integration and by international cooperation, full aligned with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The 2030 Agenda, the Seville Commitment, and the Doha Program of Action converge on the same principle. Coherence across national, regional, and global levels is essential to build productive capacities, diversify economies, and ensure resilience beyond graduation. First, regional integration as a driver of scale, value, and addition and SDG implementation. By accelerating intra-African trade, boosting Africa's trading position in the global market, the African Continental Free Trade Area offers LDCs an unprecedented platform to advance SDG 9 on industry and infrastructure, SDG 8 on decent work and the productive transformation, and SDG 17 on partnership. But regional integration can only deliver results if productive capacity and infrastructure exist. The Lobito corridor, connecting the Atlantic to the inland economy, is a concrete illustration. It is designated to facilitate the exports of minerals like copper and cobalt from DRC and Zambia, which are critical for global supply chain and green energy transition. It reduces logistics costs, expands export options, stimulates industrialization, and strengthens regional value chains, making a direct contribution to the 2030 Agenda's ambition of inclusive and sustainable growth. Second, technology innovation and capacity building, essential to achieving SDG 9 and SDG 4. LDCs remain largely excluded from technological and digital value chains. The Seville Commitment and the 2030 Agenda both emphasize that access to technology, digital inclusion, and innovation ecosystems are indispensable for transforming economies. Capacity building, including through technical and vocational education and training, is also critical for implementing SDG 4 on quality education and enable countries to adapt to climate, economic, and technological shocks. Third, transformative financing and de-risking vital to achieving SDG 8, SDG 9, and SDG 17. No LDC can diversify exports or strengthen SMEs without predictable long-term financing. The Seville Commitment calls for blended financing, de-risking tools, impact investment, and green financing aligned with national strategy, exactly what the 2030 Agenda and the SDG 17 call for. Mobilizing private capital is essential, but it requires an enabling environment supported by international cooperation and risk mitigation mechanisms tailored to LDC context. Fourth, ensuring a smooth, resilient, and inclusive post-graduation transition, central to the 2030 Agenda's pledge, leaving no one behind. Graduation must strengthen, not weaken, development progress. This requires gradual and predictable adjustment to trade preferences, continuous institutional strengthening, long-term investment in high-value sectors, SME integration into regional value chains, and an industrialization pathways that is green, digital, inclusive, and centered on women and youth in full alignment with the SDG 5, SDG 8, and SDG 9. This is the essence of graduation with momentum, as defined both by the Doha Program of Action and the Seville Commitment. Excellencies, finally, when national development strategy are supported by regional integration and an international cooperation architecture fully aligned with the 2030 Agenda, the Doha Program of Action, and the Seville Commitment, LDC can achieve a resilient, diversify, competitive, and inclusive economic transformation. This integrated approach is at the heart of Angola's development vision and of the future we collectively seek for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, especially your sharing the experience of Angola in terms of creating productive capacity, skills, and your investment in education, technical education, etc. So again, because of the interest of time, I'm not going to say much. Invite our next speaker, Mr. Joseph Enemiu, Acting Head of Economic Development Policy and Research Department, Ministry of Finance, Planning, and Economic Development in Uganda. You have about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to my fellow panelists and delegates. It's a privilege to be here sharing with you today. Just before I start, I'm not the typical Ugandan. The average Ugandan, median Ugandan is about 17 years old, is a girl, and comes from the rural area. So I'm an outlier as I sit here. With respect to the questions we have, I think straightforward. The evidence we have in Uganda, for example, shows that 60% of the costs that businesses incur are associated with energy, transport, and logistics. So any discussion really on structural transformation and competitiveness must squarely deal with those elements. We cannot address digitization without a discussion on energy, because you appreciate what it takes to power these systems and the connectivity. So in the case of graduating countries, especially from Africa, I think that collectively we must work on expanding access to energy as a starting point, and also boosting connectivity, last mile connectivity. We understand, of course, that digitization, among other things, includes e-governance, as well as e-commerce in the way we solution for enterprises. So we think it critical to deal with things like rural electrification, nearly 80 or so plus percentage share of the population in these regions is still based in rural areas. If structural transformation is going to be inclusive, it certainly must be able to bring on board the youth, the women in these rural areas. So I think that's one takeaway for me. The other one is intellectual property laws and enforcement mechanisms. Innovation requires that we deal with IP, intellectual property rights, as an incentive, as part of the infrastructure for people to be motivated and be able to get a return on the investment they require. So the policy, legal, regulatory, and institutional frameworks in these countries must begin and continue to contend with this space. In Uganda, we are currently on a goal. We are building a $500 billion economy in under 15 years. That is a tenfold growth increase in the size of our GDP. It requires that we double GDP every 5 years. And I'm happy to inform you we are on course for the first 5 years. But it requires that we move from a traditional to what we call a knowledge economy. And the creatives industry is a big part of that. So we've suddenly realized the urgent need to upgrade certain pieces of legislation, including copyright and neighborhood rights, to make sure that the young population we have can meaningfully engage in that space. I think the other thing which is critical for innovation and digitization to thrive are the registers, national registers for individuals and non-individuals, to make sure that we can account for every citizen and give them a unique identifier and understand who's born where, who has died where and when, and just make sure that it's unique and credible so that you can build on other systems around that. I think I would also highlight, as far as regional integration and international cooperation is concerned, the whole issue of mutual recognition of standards and qualifications. For example, we have in East Africa the East Africa Inter-University Council working on this mutual recognition and qualifications framework. We figured out something as simple as practicing dentistry. I don't think East Africans have a different set of teeth that are very unique. So it was just logic, common sense, that it's important we recognize how these doctors are trained, how they practice, common standards, and that is allowing a lot of movement of labor in the region. The same happens with, we have what we call the East African One Area Network that allows for, unified calling rates, cross-country interconnectivity, which are very critical to support e-commerce. Regional standards. We are also pursuing something called regional centers of excellence. I mean, you cannot be a center of excellence in everything. So we think that given the connectivity of these graduating countries, they need to specialize in a few areas and rely on the specialities of the other countries in different areas. For example, in the healthcare field, we have a regional reference laboratory system. If you pick up something in one country that must be analyzed at a higher grade, you ship the samples across next door. It just makes a lot of sense and lowers costs. So we think these are the things which are really critical to move these countries forward. Finally, I want to highlight the issue of cross-border infrastructure. To optimize infrastructure for structural transformation requires that we have mechanisms that allow for investment in cross-border infrastructure. I think a good example, again, from the East African region is the East African Power Pool. So we're taking advantage of differences in the distribution of endowment, whether it's hydropower or otherwise, and building reverse transmission mechanisms that allow for optimization of energy systems within the region. And we are rapidly revamping our railway system from a meter gauge to a standard gauge because international trade and competitiveness, you can't really have these goods moving on roads. The unit cost just puts you out of business. But you can only do that meaningfully on a scale of more than one country. And so inevitably you have to contend with how you pull infrastructure. And finally is transboundary resource management. There are natural resources that cut across these boundaries that must be collectively managed if you are to enjoy the benefits. If you take a resource like Lake Victoria or the River Nile, what happens in Uganda matters for what's happening in Egypt. And so how we harness this natural body across territorial boundaries by necessity means we must work together and build policies and infrastructures to support that. I think those are the critical things really that I wish to highlight for this conversation. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you for keeping to time. Actually, as I said, because of the time constraint, I skipped the questions for you, but you did cover that excellently. Few things that I would like to highlight about the regional integration. For Africa, it is very vital. As you said, your set of teeth is not very different from other people. What is most important here is the mutual recognition of qualification and education's degrees, etc. So that requires some kind of accreditation system that will make sure that basic competencies are comparable. Yeah, so I think that's very important observation that you made. And also the other observation that you made about the regional center for excellence. You can't be excellent in everything. So that's the specialization is very important here. And the other one is the cross-border infrastructure, uniform cross-border infrastructure. You gave the example of power grid. I think, and the railways. So I think these are very important elements that you mentioned, and especially when it comes to the paperless trade and e-trade and e-commerce, the digitalization of the economy is fundamental, and Uganda is moving in the right direction. So it is quite heartening to know. Anyway, I now invite our next panelist, Mr. Deodat Maharaj, Managing Director of UN Technology Bank for LDCs. I will give you the questions. Two questions again. How can LDCs integrate productive capacity development, value addition, diversification, and green industrialization into national and post-graduation strategies using diagnostics tools and gap assessments to identify priority sectors, sequence reforms, and drive graduation with momentum? Number two, the related question, what concrete policies and institutional frameworks are most effective for promoting innovation and digitalization through STI strategies, digital infrastructure, and innovation ecosystem? And how can these be tailored to expand opportunities for MSMEs, entrepreneurs, women, and youth?
Thank you so much, Jay, and good morning to everyone, and again, congratulations to you. Yeah, thank you so much, Jay, and good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, USG, and your team for what has been thus far a very substantive and constructive engagement on a highly timely and topical issue, and to the government of Qatar as well for helping to bring us together. I think being the last person on the panel, Chair, there are pluses and minuses. The good thing is much of what I wanted to say.
Deodat, if you could bring the microphone closer, I think we can't hear you.
Okay, I hope it's better now. Okay, thank you so much. I think much of what I would have wanted to say would have been said already, starting with a really substantive presentation made by my friend and brother, Tess. I think, Chair, the first thing that we need to start with is evidence and data and analysis. I think that's a necessary first step, because sectors are broad, the issues are so wide-ranging, and at the same time, resources are finite and needs are unlimited. I think for us at the UN Technology Bank for LDCs, tech and innovation have to be critical in helping to drive and achieve this agenda. And our remit, as I indicated yesterday, is to leverage science, tech, and innovation to help the LDCs, including those on the path to graduation or those who would have graduated within the last 5 years, to find a sustainable path. I mean, One, I will give an example based on the work that we have been doing. One of our flagship products is this technology needs assessment, which is really a deep dive in the state of technology in a country, fully nationally owned and led and driven by the government. What it seeks to do is to look at the state of technology use, but identify the very niche areas where, given the very limited resources, if you make an investment, can really have an exponential impact. And the best way to tell a story is to give an example. So perhaps I would cite the example of Tanzania because it's fresh on my mind, and I want to connect with the issue of structural transformation because, Chair, I agree with you, because structural transformation doesn't necessarily mean moving away from agriculture. It could mean doing agriculture differently. So in Tanzania, we worked in collaboration with the International Seabed Authority to do a technology needs assessment focused on the blue economy. I wasn't aware, my first posting in development was in Tanzania. But Tanzania is the largest producer of seaweed on the African continent. But over the last several years, because of the increase in temperature in the seawater, yields per person have been decreasing. It accounts for the livelihoods of around 150,000 people. So it generates a massive amount of employment on the continent, ready export market. What the Tanzanians have been doing for the last 95 years in producing seaweed, they have been using the same strain of seaweed, okay? So the project we are building with Tanzania now is to develop a new genetic strain of seaweed that's more climate resilient, that yields per person per day can move up from 15 kg to 30 kg per day, meaning more income in communities, in the pockets of families. Also focusing on value addition. So we are staying with a sector that has high potential and reimagining the sector, creating jobs, opportunities, foreign exchange earnings, and significant income for communities and the country. So that's like a very specific example I wanted to cite. And we are doing, my dear friend and brother, I met the Honorable Prime Minister of Uganda in Owaza at the time of LLDC 3, and Uganda has asked, as I indicated to you yesterday, for a technology needs assessment. Again, the Prime Minister said, based on the policy of government, agriculture remains a big focus. But the question she asked, which is that sweet spot? Which is that trigger point? If we make an investment, can have an exponential impact in terms of the economy of Uganda. So I just wanted to cite that example and connect it to data, evidence, analysis, and to emphasize the point that oftentimes for structural transformation, it's about finding better and innovative ways of leveraging existing capacities, including productive capacities. And when we look at agriculture, I like agriculture a lot because food resilience and food security is at the very core of the SDGs and at the very core of the development agenda of any country. Those on the path of sustainable graduation, LDCs that are a bit further away, or developing countries generally. So that's one point. The second point has to do with business and investment. I made the point yesterday following the very good statement made by His Excellency, the Director General of the Qatar Fund for Development, recognizing that whereas we need concessional financing, as His Excellency noted on the panel, and greater financing is required, and we support FFP4 and the severe, the compromiso de severe, but the reality is that we have to look beyond ODA as well. And to my mind, investment forms a critical part. But when we look at the landscape of LDCs, including those that are on the path to sustainable graduation, what we notice is that capacity to attract investment is quite weak, almost absent. And that is why I very much connect closely with the Doha Program of Action and some of the concrete deliverables that the USP had articulated yesterday in his statement, including specifically the investment facility under design. Because to my mind, to attract investment, you need projects. But more importantly, you don't need projects across the board because LDCs, including those on the path to sustainable graduation, they don't have the market environment, the ease of doing business environment as well to attract these projects. Therefore, they must have a forensic focus on projects that would emphasize tech and innovation. And we need to help and support the building of these projects. And Tanzania remains a good example because we are in the process now, as I speak, working with the Tanzanian Investment Authority to build a project for the coffee and maize sector in terms of value addition, but getting investment at scale. That, to my mind, is really, really critical because the ODA landscape is worrisome, I would say. And that's why I like your vision that you've articulated for Uganda. So that's the second point. The third point with respect to structural transformation, I want to stay on the issue of business and business environment. When we look at the data for LDCs and developing countries generally, micro, small, medium, small, and micro enterprises account for around 60 to 65% of these countries' GDP, around 70% of these countries' employment. And therefore, if you want to make a big impact, you have to focus a lot on the sector that's generating the most employment. Sure, I would think Bangladesh would be no different. I don't think Uganda will be different. I've spent my first and last posting in the UN was in Tanzania and Mozambique, respectively, and that MSME sector is so prominent. But what is happening, though, in that MSME sector that is so critical to these economies is that they have not fully embraced tech, they have not fully embraced innovation, and one issue has been digital public infrastructure, including internet access. I mean, the data that remains in my head has to do with Burundi, which is a bit further away in terms of graduation, but only 5% of the people in Burundi, they have access to the internet. Across LDCs, internet access is around 36 to 38%, more or less. Those on the path to sustainable graduation, a bit more, but not close to 80 or 90%. So therefore, digital public infrastructure and connecting it to that MSME sector is so absolutely vital. That's one. Secondly, innovation and building the capacity of the umbrella institutions associated with the MSMEs, small business associations, for example, so that our businesses can go to the digital age. My dear friend from Uganda spoke about regional integration, but regional integration will be suboptimal in terms of accruing benefits if that MSME sector, if they are absolutely left out. And the people who will benefit will be big business exporters, okay? And therefore, to really drive transformation, we have to closely connect with that MSME sector. And the last point, Chair, I think you've made it already, but I just wanted to emphasize the importance of having a very supportive innovation ecosystem with centers of excellence, including universities, think tanks, research institutions. Oftentimes, we have found in the assessments that we have done in 15 to 16 countries is that there is a big disconnect between that capacity that's quite fragmented and totally, I think, disaggregated. And I said that was the last point, but that was the penultimate point. The last point, I come from the Caribbean. And in the Caribbean, we are focusing a lot on that knowledge economy and services because we believe, and I believe personally, that services represent the next frontier for business. And that's why I like the point because I was going to use the exact term, the knowledge economy. And that's connected to what you had indicated earlier, Chair. That's connected to that research and innovation ecosystem to create the foundation that over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, investments have to be made in terms of boosting that knowledge economy. So the future for many countries in the world, it will be based on that knowledge economy and the ability to sell your music, to sell your creativity wherever you are in the world, leveraging platforms like Spotify and YouTube, making money and creating jobs wherever in the world you may be. So I think for us and the engagement that we have, we really have to push the frontier and push the envelope a bit, because same old, I don't think will really get us where we need to achieve in terms of really driving a transformational agenda for those on the path to sustainable graduation and LDCs generally. Thank you so much.
Thank you again for a very excellent presentation. Now, I open the floor for comments from the floor. If you have any comments to make, so I will be giving in time in order of the flag that goes up. I think that is Nepal. Was it? My eyes are not very good. This is Kabadiwade, and was it Nepal on that side? Yeah, Nepal, you have the floor. Yeah, I can say Nepal. Yeah, you go ahead, please. Okay. Okay.
Good morning, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. As a matter of fact, I thank you all the presenters for their views, very interesting. But I have a particular question that I would like to address to Dr. Taferi. You mentioned the need for structural transformation, and that is the dream for all graduating and graduated countries, of course. But to move to structural transformation, we need to face the structural constraint that most of the country face in this context. As economists you give the impression that you are talking only about industry in the classic sense. Structural transformation must concern all the sectors. The primary sector, including agriculture, the secondary sector, including manufacturing, and the tertiary sector, including services and tourism in particular. In my country, tourism represents more than 30% of the GDP, and we want to make diversification within and outside tourism sector. How do you deal with the access to markets in the context of structural transformation? Since you have to face trade preference, some bottlenecks in the regional integration. I myself, I come from a region, ECOWAS. We need to have an external tariff, common external tariff, and economic union, and there are still political and technical obstacles to that. If we are expecting the African Economic Zone, there are some delays in the implementation of that. But there is also a problem of scale. A small country like Cape Verde doesn't face scale regarding tourism. We are increasing in tourism, but we do face scale when we are talking about manufacturing and export of goods. How do you deal with that in this? And finally, my also last question is about the UNCTAD tools. Once I approach UNCTAD, they have a very good program to expand trade in Cabo Verde. But in order to implement that program, there was a question of lack of funds. How are you intending to implement these UNCTAD tools regarding structural transformation? It will be very interesting to test this program if we have programs that are directed to granting to graduating and graduated countries. But at the end of the day, we need these UNCTAD tools be supported with external funding in order to be implemented. Thank you very much for your time.
Next, Nepal.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. It was really refreshing to listen to the views of the keynote speaker as well as the distinguished panelist. Let me echo the words of our keynote speaker this morning. Structural transformations is not only shift from primary sector to the secondary sector, but it is about qualitative change in economy embedded with higher level of productivity in different areas of economy. Nepal has placed strong emphasis on developing human capital by investing in education, health, and skills to build a productive and resilient workforce, as well as investing in energy, transport, and logistics and digital infrastructure for longer-term transformations. And we are also making significant regulatory reform and fostering a competitive, innovative-driven private sector. At the same time, we are endeavoring to accelerate value addition by modernizing agriculture and promoting green industrialization. Despite these efforts, Nepal, like many other LDCs, is facing challenges in accelerating structural transformations. Our industrial base is still remained very small and narrow, and enterprises is also not very developed, and there is a constraint accessing the finance to invest, and while export sector is constrained in few low-value products, leaving economy highly vulnerable. So to overcome all these challenges, we call for, as we rightly entitled our meeting, ambitious partnership with our development partners and other relevant UN agencies. First, enhanced concessional financing, grants, blended finance can help close infrastructure and productive capacity gaps of LDCs. And second, technology transfer and research collaboration support and innovation ecosystem can accelerate digital and green transformation. And third, strengthening climate finance and disaster resilience support is essential, given LDC's high vulnerability to climate change. And fourth, building human capital by investing in education and skills, which is essential for operating in more complex sectors. These are the areas where we can collaborate with our development partners and UN agencies for our structural transformations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, delegates from Nepal, and you mentioned about industrialization. Next, I'll invite UNIDO, and you mentioned about the UN agencies. As all of us know, UNIDO was established to support developing countries industrialize. It's nice to see UNIDO is here, and probably will be able to shed some light on the questions that you posed. Thank you. UNIDO.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists for their insightful remarks. And I would like to rebound on the keynote, speak about industrial policy. Moreover, I think that everybody on the panel talked a little bit about the UNIDO mandate, actually. I recognize the UNIDO mandate in all discussions. With regard to the industrial policy, of course, UNIDO totally agrees with the importance for structural transformation, but I'd like to add that 2 points. First one is that those industrial policies needs to be evidence-based. What I mean by evidence-based is, of course, they need key performance indicators, but they need to be adapted to a private sector that has the capacity to absorb it. This exercise has been done and subcontracted a lot. I think Mr. Deodat spoke about the World Bank doing business. We've seen a lot of countries gaining more than 15, 19 positions in the World Bank, in the former World Bank doing business, but there was no impact on the economic growth of the country because there were reforms, there were policies that was been made that were adapted to the World Bank criteria. But the capacity of the private sector, which is the engine actually of growth and is the actual one who is driving industrial policy, who is driving structural transformation, was not capable of absorbing the incentives and other, because it was not adapted to an informal sector who is very big in those countries. This is the first point. The second point is that the industrial policy should not be subcontracted. In many LDCs, this exercise is subcontracted. We cannot subcontract knowledge. It disrupts the capacity to implement those industrial policies. And what UNIDO is doing for this is UNIDO is giving the capacity to its member state to develop their own industrial policy. We've been requested on many occasions to support the development of industrial policy, but we rather give the capacity to countries to be able to develop themselves, which also brings us to have an advisory position. The reflection must be done together, but it's the country who has to develop its own industrial policy with industrial observatories, strategic industrial intelligence, and the capacity of governance. Industrial governance is also key. UNIDO is ready to contribute and participate in partnership development in this orientation and discuss with all UN agencies to develop programs oriented towards this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As I said, I mean, UNIDO was established to support the developing countries in the industrialization. It's very heartening to see the offer that is coming from the UNIDO. I think it's very pertinent that the countries should develop their own industry policy rather than subcontracting it. Is there any other yes, please. I can't see your flag there.
Thank you. Thanks. Really interesting session. I appreciate all the panelists.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. My name's Dr. Daniel Gay. I'm an independent consultant currently leading the Evidence and Innovation Programme for the UK Government Centre of Expertise. I speak here in my personal capacity. I used to be the Inter-Regional Advisor on Least Developed Countries for the UN CDP, and I've worked a lot with the UN in the past. Anyway, no, thanks. Really interesting session. I appreciate all the comments, and I very much agree with Tess, and I think we've talked about these issues many times. Tess is one of the founders of this idea of productive capacity and structural transformation in LDCs, along with Charles Gore, my friend. And I think this was a really pivotal moment, actually, in learning in my career when I read this stuff in the LDC reports back in 2004 onwards. I think even now, it is worth rereading and bearing in mind. I think it's hugely instructive for particularly the graduating countries, the graduating LDCs. So really appreciate this presentation. And again, in my session this afternoon, I'll talk a little bit more, very briefly touch on the importance of productive capacity and economic transformation. And I particularly wanted to pick up on our colleague from UNIDO's point about doing business, the doing business indicators. I mean, I have long felt extremely skeptical about the whole approach. I don't know, for many years I did trade diagnostic studies in least developed countries over more than a decade. And every time you go there, one of the key focuses of government was on, well, how can we move up the doing business rankings? Often I would struggle to understand where the data came from, so I always used to think that the data seemed suspicious. I didn't actually believe what was being reported in the reports. And as it turns out, there was some nefarious practices going on in the construction of the data, which is one reason to disbelieve it or to mistrust it. But secondly, and I think more importantly, this kind of index-based one-size-fits-all approach is inappropriate to the variety of circumstances that face the LDC economies. I mean, they're all different. You can't rank a certain number of precise criteria and then say every economy must be good at them all in the same way. Some apply more in particular LDCs than in others. So, for example, in the Pacific Islands, where I've spent a lot of time working, some of the...
Can you be please specific about your comments and questions? Because
yeah, sure, okay. Anyway, my point was that I feel very, very skeptical about the doing business indicators, and I think it's...
that has stopped anyway.
Yeah, indeed. But they've come up in the presentation now, and there are, you know, attempts to resurrect a kind of equivalent of doing business. They still linger, and this kind of, you know, in one-size-fits-all approach still hangs around. But I wanted to ask more about this idea of the avoidance of outsourcing knowledge. You know, I'm really curious as to know more about how particularly people on the panel might view the embeddedness of industrial capacity and industrial policy. I'm really interested to hear more about how people, you know, the panelists might think about homegrown industrial capacities and the avoidance of outsourcing of industrial policy. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks. I think, anyone there? Okay, this will be the last one because we have to give the panelists to respond.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le modérateur, et félicitations en tout cas aux panélistes pour leur contribution enrichissante. Alors, ce que je voudrais dire, c'est qu'il faut en tout cas insister sur le fait que la sortie des pays paiement souligne l'urgence d'une politique industrielle robuste et adaptative pour soutenir la diversification et la compétitivité à long terme. Ceci a été rappelé ici. Et ce qui est important d'être dit, c'est que pour le cas du Sénégal, ce travail a été initié, notamment dans le cadre de l'élaboration de sa stratégie. Nous avons pu bénéficier d'un accompagnement de la CNUSED depuis en tout cas peu, pour réaliser une étude, un diagnostic sur la politique industrielle du Sénégal. Ceci devrait en tout cas permettre d'identifier et d'améliorer les stratégies et les outils nécessaires à la revitalisation et à la dynamisation de notre économie. Ce même travail, en tout cas, devra être fait avec également l'ONUDI, qui est en relation avec notre ministère en charge de l'industrie et du commerce. Il faudrait juste trouver, en tout cas, le moyen d'harmoniser l'ensemble des interventions, puisque quand on est paiement et quand on est en voie de sortie, c'est vrai qu'il y a tout un dispositif international pour accompagner ces pays-là. Parfois, le problème qui se pose, c'est l'harmonisation de toutes ces interventions d'entités onusiennes, avec également des initiatives locales qui sont en train d'être menées pour une sortie en transition. Ce que je viens de dire, en tout cas, répond à la première recommandation formulée par Dr. Tafere, notamment dans sa présentation, à savoir l'évaluation des écarts des politiques industrielles avant la formulation, en tout cas, d'une véritable stratégie qui prend en compte en tout cas, tous les défis qui sont ressortis de cette évaluation-là. La prochaine étape, en tout cas, concernant le Sénégal, c'est la formulation d'une véritable stratégie industrielle. Et la question que je souhaiterais poser, c'est quels seront en tout cas les points d'attention dans cette prochaine étape. M. Tafere a évoqué brièvement en tout cas les étapes clés, mais je pense qu'il serait en tout cas important, opportun de mettre l'accent sur en tout cas les points d'attention que les paiements devront être en tout cas appelés à bien regarder lors de l'élaboration de ces stratégies-là, compte tenu de l'environnement international et de la concurrence qui s'ouvrira une fois le pays sorti de la catégorie des paiements. Et je pense que l'exemple du Bangladesh, notamment dans la diversification de son économie, serait en tout cas très intéressant à partager. Et je voudrais enfin terminer en tout cas félicitant le bureau de la haute représentante des paiements pour l'accompagnement en tout cas fait aux paiements, notamment au Sénégal, dans ce processus, puisque nous sommes en train en tout cas de travailler ensemble, de réfléchir ensemble sur le type d'accompagnement que l'on pourrait bénéficier afin d'avoir en tout cas une sortie en douce. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Senegal. Invite the panelists to respond. Yes, will you take the first?
Thank you very much. Very quickly, since we don't have time. Excellency, from Cabo Verde, he asked very pertinent, important question. Let me re-emphasize. Actually, by talking about new generation, smart, multidimensional industrial policy, the emphasis is don't focus just on one sector as a manufacturing industry. The new industrial policy should be one that aims to build capability across sectors. That is the emphasis. It's no longer like the old-fashioned picking winners. They used to call it picking winners. Industrial policy is trying to identify one or two key sectors and focus on that. But now I think the industrial policy you need is something to improve your structural weakness, be it in tourism, linked to local sourcing, for example, whether it's mining, whether it's industry, but it has to go across. I think that is the emphasis. Now, access to market, actually, the structural transformation we're talking about, and I try to explain this, is when you try to move up the value, technology, and productivity ladder, then the opportunity for accessing market becomes easier, whether within the region or across. The problem is if countries remain locked in low production, low value, low skill production system, then you're limited to how much ware you can sell. So this is, I will argue that moving up the technology and the productivity ladder, improving on structural transformation will actually open up possibility of accessing market, even competitively. At the moment, LDCs have duty-free, quota-free market access. Cabo Verde has graduated. That means you're competing in whatever products you sell with the Vietnams and other more dynamic sectors of the developing world. So structural transformation in the context of Cabo Verde means within your area of comparative advantage, be it tourism or services, the aim should be to improve up the to provide, for example, high-quality tourism service, or if it is exporting fishery products to compete with Thailand and others by providing, better quality fishery. So that's what we're talking about, structural transformation. It's just moving up the value technology ladder. Lack of funding for support. Actually, OHRLS has a mandate as the implementer of the Doha Program Action. And now they have a mandate with the IGRAD. They're in a position to help at least graduating countries with some of these tools. The same with the Senegal. He was talking about the gap assessment. And I'm sure UNCTAD may be doing it, but I think OHRLS will be the one that coordinating this instead of UN providing support in a fragmented way. I think with Nepal, I would just simply agree with UNIDO. If by outsourcing you mean that countries relying as a UNIDO or as a consultant helping them to design industrial policy, implement industrial policy, you're right. I think a capacity to implement your own industrial policy, design your own industrial policy will help. Actually, implementation problem industrial policy is exactly that. Policies are designed by outsiders and expected to be implemented by locals who don't understand how that policy was designed. That's the problem. If you mean that, I think I agree with you. There's no time, so I'll stop here.
Thank you. So again, if any of you would like to respond to the questions or the comments that have been from the floor, I mean, want to respond to any of these?
Yeah, just to re-echo the point made by Tess that, I mean, whatever policy that's undertaken, it can't be parachuted from the outside. I mean, the methodology we use at the UN Tech Bank is fully nationally owned and driven. I just want to respond to the point made with respect to the business environment and tech innovation in that space. I think perhaps there's a misunderstanding that there seems to be an endorsement of the former World Bank ease of doing business report. I don't think that's the intention myself or anybody had. But what is the fact? The fact is that what we can all agree on is that that environment to boost investment in that tech and innovation space is inadequate. I think we have to accept that. And whether we use the indices established by the World Bank, which is not being used anymore in any event, but when you look at a country like Rwanda, for example, where they will respond to you with respect to your investment proposal within 24 hours, where they are very proactive, where you look at Rwanda positioning itself and becoming, via investment, a hub for tech and innovation on the African continent and even across the board. When Tess spoke about boosting productive capacities and adding value, look at Rwanda's role and important leadership space that they continue to occupy now with respect to pharmaceuticals, to the extent that they have agreements now with Caribbean countries to export that know-how and that capacity. So I think I just would like to end with the point that, one, I mean, data and evidence and analysis actually absolutely vital. Ideally, they have to be driven based on local capacity and at a national level and taking into consideration the local environment. That's one. And secondly, we really have to push the envelope in terms of LDCs when we think about productive capacities. And the last point raised by His Excellency, the colleague from Cabo Verde, I come from a SIDS as well, and I think for small island developing states, including those that are here, including the Honorable Minister from Tuvalu, the reality is that boosting capacity and production in the traditional sense, whether it's garment like the case of Bangladesh, or pharmaceuticals in the case of other places, states don't have the capacity, they don't have the bandwidth, and therefore it's about reimagining, for example, in your tourism sector. So how do you have a tourism sector that benefits from artificial intelligence? So adding value in a very different way. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Just a reflection on the submission by UNIDO. I think that graduating countries, especially in the context of Africa, have a unique window because globally there are shifts that are unprecedented. For me, there are three things which are happening that make the space ahead rather virgin. One is the energy transition. I don't think globally we have dealt with industrial policy in the context really of the energy transition, whereby renewables are dictating, in a sense, how global value chains play out. Number two, we are also witnessing a very unprecedented demographics, especially in Europe, that necessarily require a level of cooperation that has not been looked at in the past. The declining birth rates, I think that it's not realistic to imagine that Europe can maintain competitiveness with these demographic trends. And therefore, its collaboration with players from other regions and, migration policy and the rest must really come into play, and a new form of cooperation takes place. I would say that the final one would be the issue of the learnings from COVID-19 with respect to globalization. I think that countries are rethinking the way you order structural value chains, and the whole issue also of data sovereignty. how you regulate a new global infrastructure like the social media architecture and sovereignty in terms of access to that data from different jurisdictions. And I think that this have to play in the way we imagine industrial policy moving forward for these graduating countries. Thank you.
As a final thought, just to emphasize how the weight of that is undermining development in LDCs, because governments are confronted with the hard choices of servicing the debt or investing in infrastructure, education, and health, which are very important for the well-being of the country. The second thing is, as long as LDCs don't have access to financing in affordable terms, it will be very difficult for them to continue to evolve in the path of graduating. And at the end, everyone needs to see graduation as part of the national program to enhance economic development and well-being. Without that, the whole process becomes very difficult, as we have seen in our specific case. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone, especially our keynote speaker and the very distinguished panelists. What I understand is that we are in a very, very, very complex world. The old way of thinking will not work. And that is very loud and clear, especially what my friend on the left, Joseph Inimiu, has mentioned. Because of his age, he said he's the youngest person, he can probably see much better than we older people are. We are used to the old-fashioned or old thinking. We need a new generation to think in a different way. One thing that runs the danger in here, for example, when Angola case was saying that they were investing in skills and educations and things like that. If at the same time we cannot create demand for those, we are assuming that supply will create its own demand. We may end up with more problem than we have now. And that is the reason why what Joseph here is saying, that there will be a new kind of cooperation needed. The migration policy, the population policy, they are all integrated now. And this is the reason why the theme of this high-level meeting is very appropriate, is forging ambitious partnership. I think this word ambitious is very significant here, the partnership there. So I really commend the organizers to think of this title. And again, the government of Qatar for facilitating this meeting, high-level meeting, on this very important topic. So with that note, I'll declare this session closed, and now I think I have one more announcement. His Excellency Omid Badri Ray, the chair of LDC group, I think he has some announcement to make.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, this is the first meeting of this kind that brings together graduating and graduated LDCs. And we've seen that extensive preparations have gone into it. And we have also seen that very good documentations, and during the course of our meeting, we've also heard substantive presentations from a very established and renowned speakers and also a panelist. So as a chair, what I'd like to propose is to have the outcome document, and the chair has already prepared a very brief outcome document. And this outcome document is entirely based on the Doha Program of Action. And what we also felt is that delegations have also a strong feeling to have some kind of outcome document after having such intensive and substantive meeting. So the chair has prepared a draft outcome document and in support of the Secretariat. So we are circulating through the Secretariat OSR LLS the draft outcome document. In maybe after this session or in the end of the day today. And this will be a hard and soft copy, and we would like to request all delegations to review our draft outcome document, and if they have any comments and suggestions, we would like to request them to share with the Secretariat. And the chair has a strong view that we should not let it go without the outcome document after having such intensive, substantive, and useful meeting. That's my proposal as chair of LDCs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your intervention, and I think it's very important, as you highlighted, that we should have an outcome document after such a important gathering. For the first time, the graduating and graduated countries are together. And again, as I keep emphasizing, we are in a very complex world, and we need ambitious program and ambitious partnership. I think this is very important. Again, with that words, I declare this session closed, and then we invite you to the refreshment